In my video on The Dark Knight, I mentioned Aliens among some of the greatest sequels of all time. It's not just one of the best sequels though, it's also often considered one of the best action movies ever made, and is widely recognized for its influence on the genre. Considering the reputation that it's garnered over the years, it would no doubt come as a surprise then that it was almost never released. In fact, even once it was put into production, writer and director James Cameron had to fight both the studio and the crew every step of the way. A big reason for these constant disagreements was the direction James Cameron was taking this franchise. Alien was both a critical and a commercial success. It would seem logical to simply copy what worked and churn out a sequel just to make a profit. That wasn't the vision Cameron had in mind though. Based on a suggestion from producers David Giler and Walter Hill, Aliens would be an action movie set on the planetoid from the original film. This was a bold change that, admittedly, I was a bit apprehensive about. Last week I reviewed the original Alien, which I absolutely loved. A lot of what I liked about that film, though, isn't present in its sequel. Despite my apprehension, I still had high expectations for Aliens. Obviously, the critical acclaim it's received plays a part in that, but also the simple fact that it was directed by James Cameron inspires confidence in its quality. With all that being said, did it meet my expectations? Is it really one of the greatest sequels and one of the greatest action movies ever made? Following the success of Alien, it seemed like a sequel would inevitably be made, and the production company, Brandywine Productions, aimed to capitalize on this success. Fox disagreed, however. They felt that Alien was a fluke and refused to finance a sequel. They even tried to claim that the first Alien movie didn't turn a profit in the first place. Eventually, the producers sued Fox over this claim, and as a result of this lawsuit, Fox was made to finance Alien 2. With this whole process taking over 4 years, by mid-1983, Brandywine finally started looking for a scriptwriter. Eventually they stumbled upon a science fiction movie that was still in development at the time, and they were curious about the writer. That film was The Terminator, written and directed by James Cameron. By November 1983, James Cameron submitted a 42-page treatment for Alien 2. He wrote it in 3 days, and he based it on a single suggestion from the producers: Ripley and soldiers. This treatment wasn't received favorably by executives, however, and development on Alien 2 stalled once again. By mid-1984, though, Fox was looking to make more sequels since they had very few projects in development. Fox executives eventually reached out to Cameron once again, who by this point had expanded the 42-page treatment to 90 pages. This time it was received much better by the executives. However, Cameron also revealed that he wanted to direct the film, which they were apprehensive in agreeing to. A few months later, though, The Terminator finally released, and following its success, Cameron was given the role of director on Alien 2, which he subsequently renamed Aliens. In early 1985, Cameron submitted the finished script. However, that proved to only be the beginning of this troubled production. Fox executives liked the script, but were concerned about the budget. Eventually, they were able to negotiate a somewhat reasonable budget. However, the executives then took issue with the casting of Sigourney Weaver. They expected her to demand a high salary, which she rightfully did after being underpaid for her work in Alien. To be fair though, Weaver being underpaid was largely a result of her being almost entirely unknown at the time of her casting. Still, with Weaver demanding such a high salary, the budget would be tight for the rest of the cast, with most actors being largely unknown, and also some returning from The Terminator. 3 notable actors who returned are Michael Biehn, Lance Henriksen, and Bill Paxton. All 3 play a significant role in Aliens, although Michael Biehn wasn't initially supposed to be cast. He was brought on after the person who was initially cast was fired shortly into production. Overall, he does a fine job in the role of Hicks. Interestingly, his character kinda pulls a Ripley in the first Alien, with him largely being irrelevant in the opening moments of the narrative, but then suddenly becoming one of the most important characters in the film. Lance Henriksen was also brought on from Terminator, and he plays the android Bishop. Lance Henriksen plays the part with an almost childlike innocence that is equal parts endearing, yet due to past experiences with androids in this series, also unnerving. Bill Paxton is the real star of the show here though. His character Hudson serves as both the comedic relief and also the most relatable character in the cast. Similar to the role that Lambert had in the original film, Hudson helps to ground the story in reality due to his realistic reactions. And in these reactions, he also drops the most quotable lines in the film.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
And of course, when talking about notable performances, I have to mention Sigourney Weaver. She did a great job in the original Alien, but this performance is just as good, if not better in my opinion. In fact, Weaver was even nominated for an Academy Award for this performance. One of my personal favorite scenes from her in Aliens is her outburst during the debriefing. Since we've seen what she's been through, we know that her anger, and especially her fear, are justified. This scene also serves to provide necessary exposition to audience members who may not have seen the first movie. While I don't think it's entirely necessary to make sure a sequel is accessible to people who haven't seen the original, the 7-year time gap between releases means that it's likely some audience members may not have had a chance to watch the original. It also helps that the exposition is kept brief and is relayed in an interesting way. And of course, Sigourney Weaver's performance here plays an important role in holding the audience's attention. We'll get into why exactly this performance was as effective as it was later on though. With the cast finally put together, production officially began on Aliens. And immediately issues presented themselves. James Cameron and producer Gail Ann Hurd had consistent disagreements with the crew over various matters, with both the original cinematographer and assistant director eventually being fired. On one occasion, tensions grew to the point that the crew simply walked out in the middle of the day. Eventually, Cameron and the crew were able to work out an agreement, and production continued without issue. Afterward, though, Cameron would describe the crew as lazy, insolent, and arrogant. Despite the issues, the finished product is spectacular. While the sets in Aliens are very different from those in the original film, that actually makes sense, as there's been a 57-year time skip. There are also some shots in Aliens that I genuinely can't believe were done in 1986. Two of my favorites are the dropship crash and the shot of the alien rising out of the water. The original film could get away with limited movement from the alien since it was a horror movie. The alien being obscured didn't come off as a technical limitation, rather it came off as more of a stylistic choice. Here the aliens are on full display though, and they look incredible. Their movements are smooth, and at no point did I find myself doubting that this was an alien species. And keep in mind, this was all done without CGI, just expert character acting, puppeteering, and costume design. Speaking of expert puppeteering though, the most ambitious aspect of the film by far was the Queen Alien. This thing is massive, reportedly being about 14 feet tall, and it took several puppeteers to operate, along with control rods and hydraulics. And all this effort definitely paid off in the end. The Queen Alien is profoundly memorable and terrifying. And because of her significance in both the plot and with the themes of this story, it was vital that she was portrayed convincingly. The power loader is also insanely impressive. It was accomplished in much the same fashion as the Queen Alien, and yet again, I can't believe how convincing it looks for 1986, especially in action. When Ripley fights the Queen Alien while in the power loader suit, I was shocked by just how good this fight looked. Considering all the moving parts required to get these shots, it genuinely might be one of the most impressive action set pieces I've ever seen in a film. With all this attention being put on the visuals, not much time was left for the score. Despite this fact, I love the score for Aliens. I would have never been able to guess that it was rushed. And it wasn't just slightly rushed, the score was completed in just 3 weeks, when the composer, James Horner, was promised 6. That part in the opening credits where the strings come in is incredible. It sounds somber and lonely, yet also tranquil. I couldn't think of a more fitting track to accompany someone drifting alone in space while in hypersleep. Also, this is a credit to the sound designer rather than the composer, but the metronomic beep of the detection devices the Marines use makes these sequences significantly more tense than they otherwise would be.
Are you alright?
Yes.
Despite its troubled production, Aliens was met with both critical and financial success upon release. Nowadays, there's actually 2 different versions of the film though. There's the theatrical release, and an extended edition with 20 minutes worth of deleted scenes added back in. And in my eyes, this extended edition is the best way to watch the film. One reason I prefer the extended edition is because of the added scenes of Newt's family before the alien attack. Since following this we only see the aftermath, the alien attack is made even more tragic. The biggest reason I believe the extended edition to be superior to the original though, is because of the scene where we're told that Ripley had a daughter. Not only being aware of this information, but also seeing her grieve this daughter adds weight to one of the primary themes of the film. The main source of conflict in the third act is Ripley's maternal instinct to protect Newt, which is somewhat motivated by the loss of her own daughter, versus the Queen Alien's maternal instinct to protect her entire species. And they really leaned into the whole action hero thing with this sequence. Ripley goes full 80s action hero with a flamethrower and assault rifle taped together. It makes for a very distinct and impactful visual, so I can see why it was used for the poster. It not only looks cool, but also supports the maternal themes of the film. And following this is the battle with the Queen Alien directly, which serves as the climax of the entire story. That being the case, it's important that this moment carried as much weight as possible. And the scene where we find out that Ripley lost her daughter provides that emotional weight. This conflict is also where I find myself disagreeing with some when discussing Aliens. I've seen some frame this final battle as good versus evil, but I don't necessarily see it that way. Rather, I think it's more so a pure fight for survival. Both sides are fighting simply for their own survival and for their race. While obviously the aliens do some horrible things, Ripley specifically mentions how she doesn't know who's worse, humans or the xenomorphs, because at least they don't betray each other. Also, since the aliens are more animalistic in nature, words like evil don't seem to fit them. Of course, their method of reproduction involving violation and murder does make it easier to attach such a label though. And that actually brings me to my biggest gripe with Aliens. I mentioned in my Alien video how the themes were tackled in a mature and subtle way that lended itself to the horror. In Aliens though, words like embryo and impregnation are used, which overtly draw attention to these concepts. This matches the direct approach Aliens takes with both its plot and visuals, and to be honest, it is a fine approach, I just prefer the relative subtlety of the original. Another theme that makes its return in Aliens though is that of corporate greed, which is actually even more prevalent. For all intents and purposes, Burke is basically Ash in this story, with Bishop being a misdirect. Also, since this time it was a human that betrayed the crew for the sake of the corporate overlord, it hurts the characters and the audience just a bit more. It's not just an android following orders, instead it's a man chasing glory at the expense of others of his own free will. And he didn't just make this choice once either. He consistently manipulates anyone and everyone he can. First, he sent Newt's family to the derelict spacecraft, fully aware of the danger present. Then he formed the Marines mission as a front to retrieve the aliens. Not only that, but he likely intentionally chose Lieutenant Gorman due to his relative inexperience, since he was probably easier to manipulate. Because Gorman was so inexperienced though, he freezes and most of the squad is wiped out as a result. Obviously this is Gorman's fault, but it's also Burke's, since Gorman should have never been in this position in the first place. Once Burke's motives are finally discovered by Ripley, he could have just left it there. But instead he betrayed her once again and concocted a plan that would have involved the deaths of everyone on this mission aside from himself. And even once this plan is discovered, he betrays everyone yet again and attempts to leave them to die. Of course, this time it backfires and he's finally killed by the aliens. I found this to be a satisfactory conclusion to his arc, but there's also a deleted scene where Ripley runs into him while searching for Newt. Personally, I have no problem with the idea of the scene. It fits both characters well, as I don't think Ripley would have left him to suffer despite all he's done to her throughout the narrative. My only problem is that according to the rules established in this franchise, the facehugger would still have been attached by this point, so logically, this interaction could never have happened. And that might be why this scene was left out of both the theatrical release and extended edition. Either way, Burke keeps those themes of corporate greed alive, and while his betrayal may have been somewhat obvious, Bishop serves as a good misdirect, and I didn't anticipate the full extent of Burke's betrayal at all. A new theme present in Aliens, though, is that of confronting trauma and finding closure. The only reason Ripley agrees to go back to LV-426 was to eradicate the aliens once and for all. She's haunted by the memory of Kane's death, and she knows that she won't be able to move past it until every last one of the aliens is dead. This also makes Burke's betrayal even more sinister. He says earlier in the film that he read Ripley's psychanalysis, so he knows about these nightmares. Yet he was still willing to risk bringing one of the aliens back with him. Not only that, but he lied straight to Ripley's face about his plan in order to ensure her cooperation. A big reason why both this betrayal and Ripley's trauma work so well though, is because of Sigourney Weaver's performance. Ripley spends much of her time in this film either being a mother to Newt or suffering from PTSD, and Sigourney Weaver captures this duality perfectly. A moment that I love is when Ripley shudders as Hicks brushes past her. It's such a small thing, but it really sells just how traumatized she is. And since we as an audience are fully convinced of her trauma, each of Ripley's victories are intensely satisfying. It's why when she braves the alien nest and mows down the aliens with a flamethrower, it feels earned and cathartic, with that feeling being made even stronger when she finally blows the Queen out of the airlock, which the audience has come to recognize as the sign that it's all finally over. And the final shot of this film mirroring the last shot in the original, but this time with the addition of Newt, was a stroke of genius. In a movie full of amazing shots, this might just be my favorite. While the original Alien immediately cemented itself as a personal favorite of mine, Aliens didn't exactly reach those same heights. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate the narrative, the impressive production value, and the themes of this story, but I just feel that overall, it had less to say than the original, and just wasn't as captivating to me personally. Aliens plays out much more like a typical blockbuster than the original did. However, that's not to say that Aliens has nothing to say, or that I didn't enjoy it. As an action story and a visual spectacle, it's incredible. But I do feel like something was lost between the two movies. Alien had this grounded relatability. Each member of the crew felt like a real person, and this meant that each death carried much more weight. A small example of this loss of relatability is Ripley's shoes, where in the original she wore Converse, in Alien she wears some kind of space shoe, which upon further research are apparently Reeboks, and that pretty much sums up the lack of relatability. No one actually wears Reeboks. Like I said, that's a small example, but while the events are bigger in Aliens, I felt everything just a bit less. With all that being said though, comparing Alien and Aliens doesn't really make sense. They're two very different films in two entirely different genres, and I thoroughly enjoyed both. Aliens was fast-paced and relatively fun from beginning to end, and is yet another entry in this franchise that I'll likely return to a number of times. Overall, I would have to agree that Aliens is one of the greatest action films and greatest sequels ever made. It would go on to inspire both sci-fi movies and video games for years to come, and it established Alien as a profitable franchise. While taking the franchise in this new direction was a bold move, it worked out and offered the series much more flexibility with its future. How did the franchise use this flexibility? Well, judging by the many negative reviews of the next entry, not well. Alien 3 would release 6 years after Aliens, yet again with a new director, and not just any director. The Alien franchise would continue its streak of getting legendary directors very early in their careers. This time it was David Fincher. And while I do love David Fincher movies, I've never seen Alien 3, so that's what we'll be discussing next week. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.